Hey there. My name is Darian Voss. I work as a builder and scaffolding supervisor on the construction sites of Eldermarch. In the eyes of everyone around me, I am nothing more than an ordinary man, coarse linen shirt always dusted with lime hands, calloused from hauling ropes and stones and timber, living alone in a cramped, rented room behind an old forge. I have no family, no one waiting for me after each shift. People think I am the quiet type who finishes his day, drinks a cup of dark ale and sleeps. They do not know that years ago, I was part of an elite guard unit serving the southern nobility, and that I left that life behind after a mission that cost me the woman I had planned to marry. I swore then that I would never be a hero again. I would not involve myself in the affairs of the powerful. I would never let myself be pulled back into that world of blades and blood. So for the last few years I have lived as a common laborer. The heavy work tires my body until my mind is too exhausted to remember. The monotony keeps the old memories from clawing at me too hard. That evening, the site closed early because black clouds had rolled in and a cold wind whipped across the western wall. I slung my tool bag over my shoulder and took the shortcut through the old quarter. The narrow alleys there have slick stone floors and high walls with few oil lamps. Most citizens avoid them after dark, but I know the layout well enough not to care. Rain had just begun to spit when I heard the struggle. Then a woman's voice muffled by fear. "Please, let me go." I stopped at the mouth of the alley and looked into the shadows beneath a broken awning. Two men had pinned a girl against the stone wall. She wore a dark cloak and finer clothes than anyone wandering these streets at night should wear. One man held her wrists, the other rifled through her pockets and pressed her shoulder down. What struck me most was that she was not human. She was an orc girl, young and strikingly beautiful, even in terror. Her green skin had gone pale, her long black hair tangled from the fight. Yet she kept her back straight, and from the cut of her garments, the quality of the fabric, and the way she still tried to hold herself with dignity, I knew she came from high birth. For one brief heartbeat, I thought, this is not my business. Getting involved would only bring trouble. The city is full of patrols. It is not worth exposing myself for a stranger. Then she let out a choked, desperate sound. At the same moment, an old memory slammed into me. The night I arrived too late, the woman I loved lying cold because I had been a few heartbeats too slow. I knew that if I turned away now, I would have to live with that feeling again. I stepped into the alley and said very quietly, "Let her go." Both men turned. They looked me up and down and laughed. In their eyes, I was just a builder in a dusty shirt hand still stained with lime. One of them growled that I should disappear if I didn't want a beating. I said nothing more. I pulled a sturdy wooden brace from my tool bag, the kind I used to level stonework. When the nearest man lunged, I pivoted and struck the edge of his wrist. His knife clattered to the ground. The second man moved faster, but he was still slower than reflexes I had drilled into my bones for years. In a handful of seconds, one lay unconscious from a blow to the throat. The other sprawled against the wall after I swept his legs out from under him. I did not kill them. I only put them down hard enough for the girl to escape. When she was free, she did not run. She leaned against the wall, cradling her bruised wrists, and stared at me as though she had just witnessed something that defied logic. It was not immediate gratitude. It was pure astonishment that a common builder had dropped two armed men so quickly. I asked short and flat, "Can you walk?" She nodded, but her legs still trembled. At that moment, voices and running footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley. A few locals had heard the noise and come to see. They pulled out recording crystals and began talking loudly. The crowd did not see the full story. They only saw a noble orc girl with disheveled clothes, two men lying beaten on the ground, and a builder standing in the middle of the alley holding a wooden brace like a weapon. Someone pointed a crystal at me and jeered, "Look at that Eldermarch's mason just turned hero." I hated the attention instantly. I wanted to leave as fast as possible. But before I could step out of the alley, the orc girl spoke again, voice shaky yet clear. "Wait. I don't even know your name." I did not turn around. I only said, "You don't need to." At that moment, I had no idea that my cold answer would bring one of the most powerful women in the city to my door the very next morning. The next morning I woke at the usual hour, washed my face in the cracked basin, and pulled on the same dusty shirt I had worn the day before. I told myself the night in the alley was finished. The recording crystals would probably circulate for a day or two, people would gossip, and then the city would forget. A Mason had stepped into someone else's fight. I was already reaching for my tool bag when I opened the door of my cramped room. 3 black carriages stood in the narrow yard below, their lacquered sides gleaming even under the gray sky. Silver trim caught the weak morning light. Liveried guards in dark uniforms flanked each vehicle, hands resting on sword hilts. The manager of the lodging house stood frozen on the steps, face pale, as if someone had just announced the end of the world. From the center carriage, a woman stepped down. She was an orc, tall and mature, with the kind of beauty that felt like a blade-sharp cold impossible to ignore. Black hair pinned back with a single silver clasp, a charcoal gray cloak draped over shoulders that carried both grace and hidden armor. Her eyes swept the yard once and settled on me with the weight of someone who had spent years giving orders that were never questioned. She walked straight toward my door. The guards stayed behind, but their tension was clear. They watched every window, every shadow. The lodging manager looked ready to faint. The woman stopped 3 paces away and spoke in a voice that carried quiet authority. "I am Lady Maevra Sorn." The name hit me like cold water. Maevra Sorn, head of the Sorn Trade League, one of the most powerful mercantile forces in Eldermarch. Behind every spice shipment, every salt caravan, every protected warehouse in the city, her name carried almost royal weight. And she was the older sister of the orc girl I had pulled from that alley. She did not waste time on pleasantries. "My sister Liessa returned home safely last night." She was in shock. For hours, she could only repeat that a builder had saved her. Maevra's gaze moved over me, slowly taking in the calluses, the lime dust on my sleeves, the ordinary face of a man who was supposed to be nothing more than that. A common builder does not disable 2 armed men in a dark alley with nothing but a wooden brace. I said nothing. She took 1 step closer. "I want to know who you really are." Her words were not a request. They were a demand wrapped in silk. I felt the old instincts stir the same ones I had buried under years of scaffolding and stone. I kept my voice flat. "I once guarded caravans on the southern roads. Learned a little about staying alive, then I left that life. Now I build things. That's all." Maevra studied me the way a merchant studies a ledger that refuses to balance. She did not believe me completely, but she did not press. Instead, she inclined her head, the smallest bow I had ever seen from someone of her rank. "Whatever you once were, you saved my sister. For that you have my gratitude." She reached inside her cloak and placed a heavy pouch on the narrow table just inside my door. The clink of coins was unmistakable. Then she added something that made my stomach tighten. "The 2 men who attacked Liessa were not common thugs. They were hired. Last night was only the first move in a longer threat. Someone wants my sister removed from the board entirely." She let the words settle between us. "The people behind this are not street criminals. They sit at the same tables where power is decided. If Liessa is targeted, it is because she is being prepared for a political marriage that could ease the tension between human and orc trading districts. Many on both sides do not want that peace." Maevra's eyes never left mine. "You have already stepped into this. Walking away now would be the same as leaving her at the edge of that alley again." I wanted to refuse. I had spent years learning how to say no to exactly this kind of entanglement. But her words landed exactly where the memory of that cold night still lived inside me. She saw it. She waited. Finally I spoke. "What do you want from me? Come to the Sorn residence for a few days. Confirm your statement. Look at the security around Liessa and tell me where it fails. That is all I ask." I stared at the pouch, at the carriages, at the woman who could crush my quiet life with a single word. Every instinct screamed to close the door and pretend none of this had happened. But I remembered the sound the girl had made in the alley. I remembered the feeling of arriving too late once before. I picked up the pouch and set it back in her hand. "I will come, but I keep my own terms. I am not your guard. I am not your soldier. And when this is over, I return to my scaffolding, and you forget my name." Mevra's mouth curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. Agreed, Darian Voss. She turned and walked back to the carriage. The guards closed ranks around her. I stood in the doorway of my shabby room watching 3 noble carriages roll out of the poor quarter, and felt the old life I had buried reaching up to pull me under once more. I closed the door, leaned my forehead against the rough wood, and let out a long breath. I had just agreed to walk straight back into the world I swore I would never touch again. I stepped through the tall iron gates of the Sorn residence and felt as if I had walked into another city entirely. The estate sat on the eastern hill, built from gray stone and dark timber that looked both fortress and palace. Servants in crisp uniforms froze mid-step when they saw me. Guards at the entrance gave me the same mixed look of suspicion and curiosity I had seen in the yard earlier. No one expected a man in a lime-dusted work shirt to be escorted straight into the main hall. The contrast hit me harder than I wanted to admit. My rented room could fit inside one of the side corridors here. The air smelled of polished wood beeswax and faint incense instead of forge smoke and damp plaster. Every surface gleamed. Every person moved with the quiet confidence of those who had never worried about the next meal. A steward led me to a sunlit receiving room. Before I could even set my small bag down, the door opened, and Lyessa Sorn walked in. She was no longer the terrified girl I had pulled from the alley. In daylight, she looked younger than her sister. Softer, yet there was a quiet steel beneath the silk. Her long black hair had been brushed and pinned with simple silver clips. The bruise on her wrist was hidden beneath a wide cuff. When she saw me, she stood up too quickly and nearly knocked over the porcelain teacup on the low table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, voice steady, but eyes bright. "You came back." I shrugged. "Your sister made a convincing argument." She smiled, small and genuine. "Most people who help me do it because they want something from House Sorn. You refused the coin pouch. You still came. Why?" It was not small talk. She was asking because she had spent her life watching people calculate every kindness. I answered the only way I knew how, because the conversation wasn't finished, and because I don't like leaving things half-done. Lyessa studied me the way her sister had, but gentler. She told me what happened after I left the alley, how the recording crystals had already spread the story across the city's message boards, how some called it a heroic rescue, and others whispered it was staged. She spoke calmly, but I noticed the way her fingers tightened around the edge of the table when she mentioned the men who had grabbed her. She was not fragile. She had known she was being watched for days. She had gone out alone anyway because she refused to live like a hostage in her own home. That mix of courage and recklessness made something tighten in my chest. I was annoyed that she had taken the risk, yet I respected that she refused to be kept in a cage. Lady Mavra joined us a few minutes later. She dismissed the servants with a single glance and closed the heavy doors. Then she led me into a smaller windowless study lined with ledgers and maps. The moment the latch clicked, she dropped the polished mask. "Lyessa is being prepared for a political marriage," she said without preamble. "A union with a moderate human trading family. If it succeeds, it will open safe passages between the human and orc merchant districts and lower the constant tension that costs us all money and blood. But many on both sides want that peace destroyed before it begins." She unrolled a map of the city and pointed to the southern docks. The 2 men who attacked her were paid. We already traced the first payment. It came from a faction of human merchants who fear orc traders gaining more influence. At the same time, we found orc extremist marks on the same documents. They hate the idea of mixing blood even more than they hate humans. Both sides are working together in secret because they need the same result: continued hatred. Mavra looked at me directly. "Your rescue has become a symbol. A human saving an orc noble in front of witnesses. If the story spreads the right way, it softens hearts and makes the marriage more acceptable. If the extremists twist it, they will paint you as a paid actor and my sister as weak. Either way, you are now part of the board whether you like it or not." I felt the old weight settle on my shoulders again, the same weight I had carried when I still wore a sword instead of a tool belt. I had sworn never to be anyone's piece in someone else's game. Mevra must have read the thought on my face. For the first time, her voice lost its edge of command. This city has no shortage of strong people. What it lacks are kind ones who do not calculate the cost first. She paused, then added quietly, I am tired of only having the first kind around me. The admission surprised me. Coming from a woman who ruled half the city's trade with an iron hand, those words felt like a confession. I saw the exhaustion she usually kept hidden behind perfect posture and colder commands. She was not just protecting her sister. She was carrying an entire web of alliances on her back and watching it fray. I realized then that I was beginning to care more than I should. I noticed how Layessa tried to keep her hands still even though they still trembled. I noticed how Mevra's shoulders tightened every time she mentioned the threats. 2 orc women, powerful in different ways, both being pulled like pawns by forces larger than themselves. I told myself I was only here to look at security and leave. But the longer I stood in that room, the harder it became to believe my own lie. That evening, Mevra took me and a small group of her most trusted guards back to the alley where it had happened. We examined the stones, the broken awning, the exact places the men had stood. One of the guards found a small etched token, half buried in the mud near the wall. It carried the mark of a protection guild that operated out of the southern docks, the same docks controlled by the human merchants who opposed any alliance with orcs. The discovery turned the simple street attack into the opening move of a larger organized threat. I stood in the damp alley under the returning drizzle and felt the last of my old quiet life slip away. I was no longer a bystander. I was inside the story now, and the story was far from over. I looked at Mavra and Layessa standing a few paces away, both watching me. For the first time since I had left my old life, I did not want to walk away. I wanted to see this through, and that scared me more than any blade ever had. After the token from the alley pointed south, Mevra did not hand the matter over to her guards. She said it plainly in the study that night. If there was a leak inside her own house, the more people who knew, the faster the enemy would move. So only 3 of us went, Mavra, Layessa, and me. Layessa insisted on coming because she recognized names in the ledgers that no one else had noticed. The arrangement was efficient and insane at the same time. A ruling lady, a noble girl who was still a target, and a builder, pretending to be nothing more than muscle. We left the estate after midnight in an unmarked wagon dressed in plain cloaks. The southern docks smelled of salt tar and rotting fish. Crates stacked like small mountains cast long shadows under the few working lanterns. We moved between warehouses until we reached the one the token had led us to, an abandoned storage shed with a broken lock and fresh boot prints in the mud outside. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of lamp oil. Mevra lit a single shielded lantern. Rows of shelves held nothing but old ropes and broken barrels, but at the back, we found a locked strongbox, bolted to the floor. Layessa knelt and worked the mechanism with a thin pick she had taken from her sleeve. The lid clicked open. Inside were ledgers, sealed letters, and bags of coin. The handwriting matched payments to the 2 men from the alley. One column carried the mark of a radical human merchant guild that feared orc traders would take their roots. Another bore the blood sigil of an orc war faction that called any alliance with humans treason. They were working together not because they liked each other, but because they both needed the same thing, endless hatred, to keep their power. Mavra's face hardened as she read. Layessa's hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed steady when she whispered, "They don't care who dies. They only care that the marriage never happens. We copied what we could by lantern light. The longer we stayed, the tighter the silence felt." I kept one ear on the door and the other on the creak of the old timbers above us. That was when I heard the soft scrape of boots on the roof. "Down," I said. The first crossbow bolt punched through the wall where Mavra had been standing a heartbeat earlier. Then the door exploded inward and 5 men rushed us, 3 humans, 2 orcs, faces masked, blades already drawn. They had not come to talk. They had come to finish the job and burn the evidence. Layessa was their main target. One of them lunged straight for her with a hooked knife. I moved without thinking. My body remembered the old training, even if my mind still hated it. I caught his wrist twisted and drove my elbow into his throat. The knife clattered away. Another man swung at me from the side. I dropped low, swept his leg, and sent him crashing into a stack of barrels. Mavra fought beside me with a short blade she had kept hidden beneath her cloak. She moved like someone who had trained in private and never needed to prove it in public. Liessa grabbed a broken spar of wood and swung it hard enough to crack bone when a third attacker grabbed for her, but there were too many. A man I had not seen drop from the rafters above Crossbow already aimed at my back. I turned too late. Mavra shoved me sideways. The bolt tore across my upper arm instead of sinking between my shoulders. Pain flared hot and bright. I felt blood run down my sleeve, but I kept moving. I took the man down with a strike to the temple that dropped him like a sack of grain. The fight lasted less than a minute. When it ended, 4 of the attackers lay unconscious or dead. The last one fled into the darkness. We stood among the broken crates, breathing hard. Blood dripped from my arm onto the dirty floor. Mavra's cloak was torn. Liessa had a cut on her cheek but was otherwise unhurt. Mavra looked at the wound on my arm, then at me. Her voice was low. "You do not fight like a man who only guarded caravans." I pressed my hand over the gash and said nothing. The old life I had buried was standing in the open now, naked and ugly under lantern light. Liessa stepped closer, eyes wide, but she did not speak. She simply tore a strip from the hem of her own cloak and bound my arm with steady fingers. When we were sure no more attackers were coming, we gathered the remaining papers and left the warehouse. Back in the wagon, Mavra finally asked the question she had been holding since the first morning. "You were more than a caravan guard." I stared out at the dark street sliding past. The pain in my arm helped me keep my voice even. I was part of the elite Southern Guard, high protection detail for nobles who paid enough to own other people's lives. I was good at it. Too good. Until the night I was too slow. The woman I loved died because I hesitated half a second too long. After that, I put the sword down and picked up a hammer. I told myself I would never protect the powerful again. Silence filled the wagon. Liessa's hand found mine in the dark and squeezed once brief and warm. Mavra watched me for a long moment, then said something I did not expect. "I will not ask for more than you wish to give. But know this tonight, you saved my sister again. And I saved you. The debt between us is no longer one-sided." She leaned back against the seat. For the first time since I had met her, she looked almost human, tired, determined, and carrying a weight heavier than any ledger. When we reached the Sorn residence, the guards met us at the gate. Mavra gave quiet orders to double the watch and burn the copied documents in the study fireplace so no one else could see them. Then she turned to me. "If we survive this, I owe you more than coin or thanks. But right now I need you to stay. Not as a servant, not as a hired blade, as someone who has already chosen the right side once." I looked at Liessa, who stood beside her sister, watching me with quiet hope then. At Mavra, who had just taken a crossbow bolt meant for me. I thought of the men in the warehouse who had tried to kill us simply because we wanted peace instead of hatred. I gave the only answer I could: I'll stay. But when this ends, I go back to my scaffolding. And you let me disappear again. Mavra nodded once. "Deal." We walked inside together. My arm burned. My old life had clawed its way back into the light, and yet, for the first time in years, I did not feel alone in the dark. We'd become something more dangerous than allies. We'd become people who trusted each other with blood. Mavra decided not to keep the matter quiet. She chose to reveal everything openly before the city council and representatives of the trading districts. The reason was clear: the conspiracy thrived on rumors and fear. To kill it, she had to drag it into the light. The hall was packed that day. Nobles from human houses, orc trade, leaders, neutral merchants, guards, and those who had come just to watch which side would lose face. I was asked to stand there as a witness, the thing I hated most. But it was no longer avoidable. Mavra stood at the center of the dais and spoke without notes. She told them everything: how her sister had been attacked, how a human builder had saved Liessa in a dark alley, and how that single act had led us to uncover a secret alliance between human extremists and orc hardliners who both wanted the peace marriage destroyed. Then she said the words that made the entire hall go still. "If we let our prejudices grow larger than the truth, then we ourselves are feeding the very fire that wants war between our peoples. For a woman, known for her iron will. Those words were like a hammer blow against the pride of both sides. She called my name. I stepped forward. I felt the eyes of the human nobles judging me for standing too close to House Sorn and the orc leaders looking at me as if I had no right to be there at all. I did not give a long speech. I spoke simply. I did not know who Layessa was when I stepped into that alley. If I had known, I would have done the same. In that moment, I did not see a political piece or an orc girl. I saw a person about to be crushed by cowardly violence. If we want a day when humans and orcs can stand beside each other without tearing at each other's throats, someone has to start by not asking what species the person about to die belongs to. The words spread through the hall in a way no one could pretend not to hear. After my testimony, Layessa stepped up. She didn't speak like a noble lady trained for public address. She spoke like someone who had truly almost died. That night I was terrified. I thought no one would come. Then a man who had been taught all his life to be wary of my kind stepped between me and the blades. If he had turned away like everyone says we should do with those of a different race, I would not be standing here today. Her voice trembled at the end, but that raw honesty softened the room more than any polished words could. The evidence from the warehouse ledger's payment records, confessions from the captured men left no room for denial. The masterminds from both sides were dragged into the open, but the most important change was in how the story was now told. It was no longer orcs plotting with humans or humans betraying humans. It became a story of people from both sides choosing not to let hatred use them as fuel. After the session, as the hall began to empty, Mevra walked over to me. She no longer looked like a ruling lady giving orders. She looked at me as an equal in a rare place few ever reached. She said quietly, "If you had not stepped into that alley that night, blood would have flooded the city today." I replied, "I only did what I did not want to regret." Mevra was silent for a moment, then said even more softly, "Perhaps that is why you are dangerous." I frowned. She explained dangerous to every wall people build to keep hating each other. It was the closest thing to a deep admission she had ever given me. In another corner, Layessa took my hand when no one was looking and held it for a long moment before letting go. The gesture was small, but it told me everything between us across the line from strangers who met in crisis to something more. Between Mevra and me, what had formed was not easy love. It was a deep respect, a dangerous spark between two people who had both lived too long by control. I knew this story was not over, but I also knew we did not need to name it today. The story had begun when I ran into a dark alley and stood between a girl and the blades meant for her, thinking of nothing except not letting her fall. The next morning, a powerful lady had come to my door and pulled me back into the past I had tried to bury. From that single act in the shadows, a street attack had become a confrontation with extremists' truth, pulled from rumor, and the first turning point that forced Eldermarch to look again at the way humans and orcs had spoken about each other for too long. I do not call myself a hero. I am only a man who has grown too familiar with the pain of arriving too late. But sometimes a city changes direction, not because its powerful suddenly become good. It changes because one ordinary man in the right place at the right time chose not to turn his back.